The United States has the highest incarceration rate, not just numerically, but as a percentage of population. We incarcerate more people than China as a percentage of our population. And you learn that 30 to 50% of those inmates are there for nonviolent drug offenses. It just seemed completely ridiculous to me in the 90s and really outrageous.
Welcome to Entrepreneurs in Recovery. I'm so glad you are here for today's episode. Thank you for tuning in. If you would, please take a moment to like and subscribe to the show on YouTube. And also, if you would leave a review on Spotify or iTunes, it really helps people to find the show. And really, I really appreciate each and every one of you who have subscribed to YouTube. The channel is slowly growing, and I'm really appreciative of that. Wow, it's good to be back. And I say that because this weekend was quite a big journey. It was many hours into two different ceremonies here in Costa Rica in Chiripo. They were very beautiful. I won't get into any details here. I will unpack it in the future as I integrate the experience that happened and took place. But let's just say if I look a little tired today, that's because I am. I was up for, 20 hours at a time over 2 different days. But nonetheless, it was a very beautiful experience with very beautiful people and very beautiful people guiding the ceremony. So with that said, welcome to the show. And today's guest is Sean McAllister. And Sean is a pioneer in psychedelic law. He has been doing this for at least 25 years. And I think you're going to really enjoy this episode. I really enjoyed it. We got to get into psychedelic law. We got to get into what's happening with, people when they set up churches and what Sean's life has been like in this space, lobbying and advocating for indigenous tribes, for many organizations in Colorado and beyond Colorado. All the movements and psychedelics that have happened in Colorado and the things that you have seen take place, Sean has been behind. So this is just a really fascinating episode to tune into. I hope you enjoy it. I hope you have a blessed day. Hey, Sean, welcome to the show.
Hey, Jesse. Nice to be here.
Yeah, I think this is the second time we've met. And, I'm excited to have you on for so many reasons. And I'm pretty sure people know you already in the psychedelic space. And I'm really excited to introduce you to my audience, entrepreneurs in recovery, people I've met along the path for the last 19 years of my own recovery journey and kind of defining my own recovery journey as it got into psychedelic medicines and then realizing the legalities of this thing. And oh my God, the things that people face and the doctors that I interview that are like, I can't talk about psychedelics. I don't want to lose my license. So I'm just really excited to have you on the show, talk about all the things you've done, your spiritual journey you've been on for decades. So just really excited to have you here, my friend.
Yeah, it's great to talk about my favorite topic, psychedelics. What more interest in recovery and spirituality and mind manifesting and all the interrelated topics here. We really are blessed, if you think about it, to live in this time where we're coming out of an age of ignorance, an age of criminalization of sacred medicines. And it's happening just at the right time because unless I'm mistaken, I think the world is really suffering right now. And so I'm really grateful to be a part of this movement, grateful to be here today, and happy to cover whatever topics you want to cover.
Yeah, me too. What a great time to have you on the show. You're right. There's so much going on right in this moment. So I'm grateful to have you here to get into some of these things, to educate my audience, to educate myself more, to be armed with more of the facts. So I'd love to start, though, every guest with, tell us a brief overview of your story. I mean, how did you become the Sean McAllister we know today, advocating for psychedelics? Let us know some of that journey at whatever level you want to share it at.
Yeah, I was thinking about that as you started the show. And, 35 years ago, I'm in college in the mid-90s, early 90s. And I started thinking about, what do I want to do with my life? And I started realizing that every issue you care about has some relationship to law. There's a law about psychedelics. There's a law about your healthcare. There's a law about the environment. There's a law about workers' rights. Um, and I was a very political person in the 90s and 2000s, and I worked in legislatures um, and for a U.S. senator in D.C. And so, to me, law was about the fundamental underpinning of our society, that these are the rules. And if you want to change things, you want to make things better, then you have to change the laws, and you have to interpret the laws, and you have to implement the laws. And so I definitely got drawn to law from a sense of wanting to make some impact and change, and feeling it was a really great opportunity. I guess I also have always been a fan of the underdog. I'm kind of a shorter guy. I played college or high school football and was always like, hey, these big guys ain't got nothing on me. I can compete with them. And I love the underdog. I, became a fan of social justice and uh, learning about the history of the way indigenous people were treated. And it just seemed unfair to me. There probably was something in my childhood, my parents' divorce or something, where I saw some unfairness in life, and I just really wanted to fix unfairness. And I wanted to stand up for the underdog. And, also I really fell in love with the earth, with the environment. I credit my college girlfriend, whose family spent a whole lifetime camping and being outside. And, I think that's another underdog, the earth. And I really intended to go to law school to be an environmental lawyer, out of that passion for, geez, we're really, even in the 90s, we were talking about climate change and environmental sustainability and all the things we're dealing with in a strong way now. And, I've been thinking about these things for 30 years. So it really came out of that sense of wanting to give back and wanting to stand up for the underdog, whether it's the earth or, all these other topics. And so I went to law school for environmental law at the University of Colorado, 1996. And I loved learning about that. And I did environmental law for 5 years. But while I was in law school, I just got passionate about the drug war. I was never a heavy drug user, but yeah, I smoked some cannabis in college, and I actually had never seen cocaine until law school. And I don't even think I tried it. Other people were using it. But anyways, just the whole drug policy reality came into focus in the mid 90s. Remember, the United States had pioneered the drug war in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, and we were really in full swing. The drug war was, had manifested and blossomed in a bad way in the 90s. In Colorado in particular, we saw the percentage of state budgets going to incarceration explode from 10th or 15th in the budget priorities to number 3, right after healthcare and education was prisons in Colorado in the mid 90s. When you start learning these facts, like the United States has incarcerated and is incarcerating more people for drugs than Western Europe incarcerates for all drugs combined. When you hear those facts, when you hear the United States has the highest incarceration rate, not just numerically, but as a percentage of population. We incarcerate more people than China as a percentage of our population. And you learn that 30 to 50% of those inmates are there for nonviolent drug offenses. It just seemed completely ridiculous to me in the 90s, and really outrageous. That what I realized is this was an area ripe for reform. That it turns out that the science is on our side, that addiction is not some indication of human moral failing, that actually it's a brain disease for a lot of people, that the science is on our side, the economics are on our side. It's much smarter to put money into treatment than incarceration. You can actually address the problem, education. It turns out the spirituality is on our side, that there are spiritual uses for these substances that heal our souls and give us hope for the future. So the economics are on our side, the morals are on our side, the science is on our side, the spirituality is on our side. And when you realize that, you're like, okay, all we got to do is educate people, because clearly people of goodwill would look at this and say, yeah, the drug war, billions and billions of dollars down the drain to maintain a steady use rate over the last 40 years, a steady addiction rate. It hasn't meaningfully impacted use or addiction in the last 50 years. So what are we doing? Why are we spending these hundreds of billions of dollars of precious resources that could go to educating our children, could go to improving our economy, all these things. And so, yeah, I just turned out, I went to school for environmental law, but I got really passionate about the drug war. And then actually and I'm going to just close this loop and shut up for a second, but over time, I realized that, actually drug policy reform is advocacy for the environment. It is advocacy for women. It is advocacy for LGBTQ folks. It is advocacy for BIPOC people. It is advocacy for developing countries, for indigenous people. It is advocacy for spiritual liberation and freedom. It is advocacy for emotional stability and mental health. And you just realize that drug policy reform and psychedelics in particular, because really, while I'm not a psychedelic exceptionalist, we can talk about the ways in which psychedelics are exceptional. You realize that it is an octopus that is connected to so many things. And so actually I found that psychedelics is just like law, because almost everything you care about, if you were engaged in a ceremonial and mindful use of psychedelics, you would find some connection to women's rights and environmental rights and all those things I mentioned. And so I never thought about this before. I just said it, but yes, I feel like law and psychedelics are these twins that are married in this web of interconnectivity. It really is an amazing place to be, and I feel so grateful. And I've done a lot of things in the last 25 years, but you asked, how I became this thing. That was the emotional, the intellectual background to how I got into drug policy.
Yeah, I mean, that's amazing. I think it's genuine, and it has a lot of integrity behind it. And I really, you brought up the, war on drugs and the prison industrial complex and the things that are happening there. And obviously there's a purpose to it. And, I think about the amount of money that they put into that could have gone on to treating trauma, which we're only now just barely hitting that on the head, that's a root cause for many people who are using substances and who are incarcerated. But also just how much money they could put into drug rehabilitation for people instead of the War on Drugs and the Controlled Substances Act. So, what are you seeing? Is there anything sort of changing with that? Or is there more focus now than before to let's drop the war on drugs, let's move towards rehabilitation, let's actually listen to Dr. Peter Levine and trauma and trauma-informed care? Are you seeing any shifts in that?
Yeah, I want to answer that question, but I just also want to underline, when we talk about the war on drugs and the ignorance of the past, I really don't come at this from anger or condemnation. Martin Luther King said that you can't solve hate with hate, paraphrasing. Only love can address the negative impacts of ignorance and hate. And so when I just say that, because there's a lot of, I don't want to judge our ancestors here. They were people of their time, people in 1970 who passed the Controlled Substances Act would have been 60 or 70 years old, probably a lot of these legislators in Congress. And that would have meant that they were born in 1900, and probably their grandparents had slaves or knew people that owned slaves in the 1860s. So, I mean, we just think about how far we've come in the last 50 years from people that really were ignorant, that had no background, no indigenous relationship with substances. So, I don't, I judge what they did, but I don't condemn them because I don't come from a place of hate or anger. But it's the same thing with these laws that you're asking about now. Like, as you said, they came from a place of good intentions. Like, we want to, people are on drugs. If we criminalize that, maybe less people use drugs, and we'll have a safer community. But it's still, in terms of treatment where we are, it's still pretty poor, because I think this idea I mentioned earlier that, well, people are not morally culpable because they have addiction problems. This does not indicate that they have some, deprivation of their soul or something that they deserve punishment. But that mentality, I hear it in my own family. Well, they got onto drugs and they're addicted and they should, be able to stop. And this mentality is still out there. I think we still haven't totally educated people about what addiction is. I mean, a lot of people use cocaine and even opiates, but not everybody's addicted to them. It's only a small percentage. So what is the difference? The difference is brain chemistry, background, trauma, attachment style, all the things that make up the mental health and dual diagnoses that so many people have. And so it's just a long way of saying that we still haven't won the war on, yes, people generally agree treatment is better than incarceration now. We've won that argument, but they haven't put the hard dollars there. I know Colorado still is in the bottom 25% of states in terms of funding for treatment and addiction issues. And I see, a lot of these states with the least addiction and treatment funding have the highest addiction rates, but yet they still aren't funding a lot of publicly available addiction recovery and mental health services. So I think there's still more lip service than dollars in our mental health and treatment system, and it's still a fight. I mean, in Colorado, I know this year we're rolling out psilocybin therapy. I'm sure we're going to talk about this, and that's exciting. But we can't even get the legislature to put money into a data collection process so we could show outcomes from psilocybin therapy in Colorado, because they're talking about $1 billion shortfall in money. So it's all these discretionary things that tend to get cut first. So you pay for education, healthcare, prisons still are, very strong. We have been closing prisons in Colorado. One of the things I'm proud about in my adult lifetime is we've reduced our prison populations, we've closed prisons, but still there's these mandatory expenditures. So it's just very difficult to get new money. And I think there's a lot of, foundations and public-private partnerships out there, but I still think the perception and the reality is that there is not enough treatment funding and mental health funding. And yeah, I'm kind of worried about that. We need more than ever right now. We're in a mental health crisis.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, people who are stepping up and putting their voices out there about this and, being open about their recovery journey or their trauma, are really heroes in many ways. And I think that the more people that share their story, I mean, I think, a couple of weeks I'm going to speak in Indiana and Clarksville, Indiana, and they were crushed by the opioid epidemic, double the rate than their neighboring Louisville, Kentucky neighbor. And, when I think about the amount of people that passed away during that time and are still today, it directly not only impacts, I remember in 2015 talking about this and people were like, yeah, everyone's
everyone's impacted by addiction. But like now in 2024, it's like, no, everyone is impacted by addiction. It's like changed in the last 9 years. People are really starting to spend more time in this. And I think that brings me to the conversation of psychedelics and, the work that you've pioneered, even in Colorado with Colorado's Proposition 122. And I think having people to hear and be educated, like you said, education about where we at with this psychedelic renaissance, where we're stepping into new modalities of helping people through ibogaine or ketamine assisted therapy or psilocybin assisted therapy, or these different modalities that are available. I mean, I'm excited for this conversation. I think in many ways the conversations here are 2 years ahead of their time, but we're at least putting them right now into the field for these people to pick about. Because my work, like your work, it brings me to drug courts, some of the biggest drug courts in the country I get to work with. So it becomes real. It just takes time. And you must have a lot of patience. Yes. My God.
At the same time, things have been happening fast. I'll give you an anecdote here. 25 years as a lawyer. So when we talk about how I got into this, couple of years as an environmental lawyer at the beginning of my career, but then I went out and started my own law practice in 2004 and spent almost a decade as a criminal defense attorney. And that's when I stood side by side by people with mental health and drug addiction issues and told, the system, this is a real human being. There's a reason this happened. They're not a number. They're not a bad person. They made a mistake, or they have a drug addiction issue. And, I stood side by side, disproportionately Black and brown defendants facing prison over drug use. And when I was working as a criminal defense attorney in Colorado, one marijuana plant in Colorado, was the same level felony, class 4 felony in Colorado, as it was to rape your own child. That's where we were. One marijuana plant, the same as raping your own child. Now, obviously, the punishment would be different, but it was just insane. And so to see how far we've come is so rewarding. Remember, you mentioned being ahead of our time. I mean, first of all, this is an intergenerational struggle for human rights and justice. We have a 70-year history of the war on drugs built on ignorance, racism, and financial self-interest, and that doesn't turn around quickly. And the public perception takes a long time. But if you think about the accelerated history, as Terence McKenna would talk about, the kaleidoscopic aspects of ever complex reality, it's been speeding up. 1996, California decriminalizes medical cannabis. 2000, Colorado decriminalizes medical cannabis. It wasn't, though, until 2012 that Colorado became the first state to legalize adult use cannabis for all adults. 2012. Okay, so we've had that system about 12 years. In 2019, Denver became the first city in the nation to decriminalize psilocybin mushrooms. And I was honored to be a legal advisor and a participant in that campaign, the first ever city. Quickly after that, many cities in California did this. And then in 2022, Oregon decriminalizes all drugs and creates a regulated pathway for psilocybin. 2020, Oregon did this. They beat us to the punch because Colorado followed in 2022 on this Prop 122 campaign that I helped co-author to become even farther progressive than Oregon. Colorado is the freest place in the world for psychedelics. We decriminalized 4 psychedelics in Colorado: psilocybin, DMT, mescaline other than peyote, and iboga. All adults in my state can possess and consume those 4 psychedelics today with no criminal penalty. And we created a regulated pathway for psilocybin therapy in 2022 that now is rolling out as we speak in January 2025. License applications are live, and you could apply to be a state-approved psilocybin facilitator in Colorado and run a healing center where you have people come and consume psilocybin on site. And so, wow. I mean, are you kidding me? This arc I just mentioned in just, the last 25 years has totally turned this upside down. The United States is the country that pioneered the drug war and globalized the war on drugs. And all these countries around the world had to enforce these laws to maintain international treaties and keep us happy. And now we're the country that's going to dismantle this enormous behemoth that we created. And it's happening slowly. Cannabis, it turns out we're going to have to do these probably one drug at a time. Cannabis, then psychedelics or psilocybin. But eventually I'd like to have a broader discussion, because if you really care about saving lives and mental health, then you care about opiates and you care about methamphetamines and you care about the harder discussions. But, in some ways, cannabis and psychedelics were the easy, low-hanging fruit. And so I'm going to shut up here, but that's a long, rambling answer to say I'm totally thrilled. I never thought we would get this far. And it's like I said, the public has heard the message. That being said, maybe we're just living in our bubble in Colorado because Massachusetts rejected this idea a couple months ago, and California's been struggling to pass something like this. And so it really is a critical time of making sure we show the Colorado model will work, and, expressing our values, building community, representing that psychedelics can be part of a healthy life, not a drug addicted life. We have to move from counterculture to culture. Our movement talks about this counterculture. It has a perception of being a counterculture thing. Psychedelics are not counterculture in indigenous communities. When a boy becomes a man and he drinks ayahuasca or goes through another psychedelic ritual, that is culture. That's not counterculture. So we still have a long way to go in the United States to move from counterculture to culture. But that's really what we are. We're community-oriented people. We love our children. We're parents. We love our parents. We are spiritual people. And I think once we can show the society that this is part of a healthy lifestyle and culture, that again, eventually we'll get recognition. And we're making a lot of progress.
Yeah, and thanks for pioneering the way with that, with you, and with your, thank God you were you had your experiences growing up, that you did to be able to, really be a warrior in this game, because you guys are pioneering what could be a model. I am from Massachusetts. I grew up in Massachusetts, and my brother texted me the day he was going to vote, and he's like, "Should I vote for this?" And I was like, "Have you listened to my podcast?" But so I obviously said yes, but it's it affects so many people, and it's really this matter of, like you said, education, and like I said, the patience you must have had, because I was, as many people know, a 15 years in abstinence sobriety AA model, forced from the courts to go to AA for 3 years, and I eventually came into psychedelic assisted therapy because there was layers of shadow and trauma that I had never been able to touch, even with, 10 years of therapy and many, many hacking modalities of my personal development hacks. Psychedelics had got to very, very deep layers. And so now, of course, I'm an advocate with, of course, integration and models that can really support this healing process. But the thing is none of this can happen without psychedelic law, without law and people like you. Like, it can't advance forward unless you have warriors that put themselves out there that make this possible. So I'm just so grateful of what you're doing, because this doesn't just, you don't just have a couple politicians who lose a kid to overdose and all of a sudden this becomes legal overnight. And no, like, we have that actually happening. Politicians, all kinds of people have lost children to overdose and fentanyl overdoses, and they start to advocate for addiction recovery. But we need a huge overhauling, and you guys are really leading the way, and you specifically. So it's amazing.
Guys, I have not had the same journey in terms of AA and addiction recovery, but, you know, here's some food for thought. I don't believe that psychedelics are drugs, okay? Yes, they impact your mind, but this whole term, psychedelics, I want to give credit to my friend Glauber de Assis from Brazil, who said this recently, that, you know, indigenous people don't look at the word psychedelics is mind manifesting, a very Western thing. Like, this is out of your mind. And, you know, when I've done ceremonial or therapeutic psychedelics, I experience much more than mind manifesting. I am in the term is, instead of psychedelics, it's somadelics. I'm in touch with my body in a way that has nothing to do with my mind, that I connect with my body. And then kendelics, the connection between, in kinship between entities, beings, and communities, so that it's not just about your mind. And what my point here is that in my psychedelic experiences, I don't feel that I'm, you know, just lost in a world of hallucination. I feel that I see things so clearly. And also, as you said, like, I have never had more sobriety in my life than since I started using psychedelics in a healthy way, to the point where I'm not drinking right now. I don't want to be a purist about this. I think there'll be a time when I have a cocktail or a glass of champagne, but this is kind of the trend that society has seen, that a reduction in alcohol use. The alcohol companies are freaking out about this. But psychedelics help with that. And also, you know, I do come from this American culture. This is what we share, that every fun event had to have some kind of inebriation involved. You go to a concert and you smoke a little weed or drink some alcohol. Every holiday party is alcohol in this country, right? And now I'm just like so enamored with the idea of, I don't need to be inebriated to have fun. This is a weird thing, really. And psychedelics support that journey. And so that's why I just, as you said, the education is so important, because, you know, we're not advocating for drug use. We're advocating for a tool that can get you to the point where you don't even want drugs, where you're happy with regular sobriety and maybe some occasional psychedelic use. But to me, that's why it's so supportive of sobriety and addiction recovery. There's something in the experience, I'm sure many people are more eloquent than me, that catalyzes commitment in your soul. You know, that moment when you see the connections in psychedelics between your addictive behavior and your unhealthy body or your unhealthy mind. And you say to yourself, geez, I am never putting toxins in my body again. And it's just so different than any other therapy. I did talk therapy for 10 years. We haven't even talked about, you know, the personal struggles I've dealt with. I had a really terrible divorce, the kind of thing that, you know, everybody hopes never happens to them. False domestic violence allegations. I got arrested. I ended up in front of a judge that I used to practice in front of. And the case was ultimately dismissed, but I had a lot of trauma from that. My kids were taken away from me. I suffered, you know, a period of parental alienation where I didn't see my children. And again, there's a happy story here that psychedelics helped me bridge the gap and get my children back and recover my personal life issues. But yeah, just in terms of psychedelics did something for me that 10 years of therapy never could do. And I was in therapy about all these things, and we peeled back the onion and we talked about it ad infinitum. But, you know, this is part of this process. We're so in our heads in the Western world. And it's really a different understanding to get out of your head and into your heart or into your soul about an issue like addiction or mental health recovery or the trauma that you've suffered, and letting go of the anger. We all carry so much anger inside of us. And so, yeah, I can't say enough. And that's why I'm here. You know, I'm just another guy that had some trauma and found a lot of healing, and then you decide you have to give back. And I think that's been the hallmark of my career. And this is what the medicine is teaching us, give first and then you'll get. Be open to others. You have 2 ears and 1 mouth, so listen twice as much as you talk. And, I think some of this wisdom is exactly what we need right now in a time of narcissism and ego. And I meet people every single day that have wasted their life pursuing a hollow dollar. And, it's just so wonderful to see them find fulfillment and meaning in a way they never have before. And then all the addiction. Anyways, I could go on and on. So, yeah, I mean, it's so important for everything we're facing right now. And that's why I can't imagine another topic that I could work on.
Yeah, I mean, it's so hard to experience life one way for such a long time and then have your first psychedelic experience blow your heart open, blow your mind open, blow your spirit and soul open to see things that you cannot see for a reason. You can't see them because we're programmed into not seeing it. And then when you can see it, and then not only see it, integrate it and have a community and have people to talk to about it, which many people don't have. And that's why we do podcasts, and that's why we get the messages out so people can find people as guides, as community, even psychedelic, even therapists who are honoring the psychedelic path and doing their own research and holding space for people as they integrate it. But I mean, as you know, I've been doing this for a little over 3 years, this psychedelic type of exploration. And now I live in Costa Rica. And so I meet people every day here who have tons of money, tons. And it's not about the money. They're surfing, they're exploring psychedelics. They're doing these different things because at the end of the day, at the end of the life, it's not going to be about that. Yeah, that's important because brings a lot of stress in the nervous system, not having financial gains. And of course, but there's a lot of people here in Costa Rica who are local who don't have that money, and they're much happier than most people I met back home in the United States. And why? It's because the medicine here is the ocean, is the sun and the jungle. And the other medicines are bonus. The ayahuasca, the stuff that goes on here, that's bonus. And so we miss that back in the West. I mean, we miss that back home in the States. I just don't have that. I don't see that as often, at least in the East Coast where I was. And so here it's a slowing down process, but ultimately you're a warrior. You're fighting for this. I'm doing it in my own way. But when I get asked to speak, people don't say, "Hey, Jess, come talk about psychedelics to our community." They actually tell me, "Don't talk about psychedelics." That's actually my instructions. Don't talk about your psychedelic journey. Wow. And I go, "Well, what if they bring it up in the Q&A?" Okay, then you can talk about it. So I'm like, all right, maybe that will happen. But it's still a very, very stigmatized topic in addiction recovery, mental health recovery. So you know that, I know that. So with that said, I'm really curious about this movement of decriminalization. And I know there's some towns in Massachusetts who have decriminalized psilocybin. But like, what is the process and the advantages of places decriminalizing, cities and towns decriminalizing psilocybin? Do you think that's a great way for a town, a city to go, or are we just kind of kidding ourselves and we should be moving towards legalization? And maybe we can even define, maybe people don't know these terms, decriminalization and whatnot. I would just love to hear, I mean, what you've done in Denver and all that. I'm really curious to hear about this.
Let's get on to the law, because
Let's
you're
get
right.
on to the law.
3 hours about the philosophical and the social, political, cultural underpinnings of this thing. But at the end of the day, yeah, many people avoid psychedelics just based on the legal status of them. And so you talk about decriminalization. This is a great way you can be active at your local level. And you might even be surprised that you might have a majority in your community that agrees with you. Even in big conservative states, there's going to be a place where people think that psychedelics should be okay. So in Texas, I bet if you polled the people of Austin, they would say yes to psychedelics. In North Carolina, if you poll the people of Asheville, I bet they would say yes to psychedelics. And so even though you might live in a place where a lot of people around you disagree, if you live in a community where you're in the majority, that's a great way to show that this isn't some crazy, wacky thing. And so actually in cannabis, we use this strategy to gain momentum for cannabis legalization. I remember I said in Colorado in 2000, we legalized medical cannabis. Great. Well, what about recreational? Medical was a limited program. The tactic we used in 2004 through 2010 was to go after local ballot initiatives to decriminalize cannabis. So, of course, we went to Aspen and decriminalized cannabis. We went to Telluride, decriminalized cannabis. And I remember I was living in Breckenridge, a ski town in Colorado. 2005, Denver decriminalized cannabis for all adults. 2009, Breckenridge did it. It's one thing for Denver. People think it's a liberal place, but then Breckenridge votes 70% in favor of decriminalizing cannabis. And it's the kind of symbol for others that says, okay, maybe we're not crazy. 70% of Breckenridge says decriminalize cannabis. Denver said it. All these other communities have said it. It builds momentum so that you can then go to the voters at the state level and maybe change state law. So the limitation, though, with decriminalization, what it means is you're going to take away local penalties for something. You cannot legalize cannabis or psychedelics at the local level because state law and federal law would always criminalize it. But you can tell your local police, don't spend any money on enforcing these laws because this is not a problem. And that's what we did in these decriminalization efforts. And because 99% of any kind of local prosecution is going to happen from your county sheriff or your city or town police department, if they don't have the power to arrest people for a certain thing, again, yes, the federal government could send, an agent in and arrest you for it. They don't have the resources to do that. State attorney generals could bring a prosecution in a decriminalized city, but why would they do that? That's a place that has voted to decriminalize something. So decriminalization is kind of a beginner change that says, don't spend any money enforcing this law in our community. But the limitation is you need to be in a town where either the city council will put that on the ballot for you, or you could petition to put it on the ballot. And sorry, I'm going to turn this heater off. It is very cold here today in Denver. But, the problem politically is that politicians are not going to take leadership on this topic because there's nothing in it for them. If they stand out and say, I believe in psychedelic therapy. I remember a politician saying this. All they do is they get mail saying, why are you advocating for drug use? So all of these decriminalization and legalization initiatives, we never really had mainstream political support. We had the support of the people, though. And so we decriminalized cannabis around towns in Colorado. And then we went to the state in 2010, and we actually lost the first ballot initiative to decriminalize or legalize adult use cannabis. And we brought it back again 2 years later. So I think we lost by 5 or 6 points in 2010. And then we came back 2 years later and we won 56-44. And the difference was we created a regulation around it and tax revenue from cannabis. Anyways, the point is that decriminalization is something you could do at the local level. It might be limited. You might have to ask your city council to do it. But if most of these reforms have happened in states where you have citizen petition ballot initiatives, because that way you don't have to ask permission from a politician. You just ask the voters. And so that's states like Colorado, California, Washington, Oregon, Arizona, Nevada, a lot of the Western states. And yes, in Massachusetts, it was a citizens ballot initiative. But many states like New York and other states, they don't have these citizen ballot initiatives. So you're going to have to work with your local politicians. But I just encourage people, that is where you need to start. Like, I think our federal politics is totally broken and it's bizarre. And I don't even know, they can't even get healthcare done or immigration. How do you think they're going to get drug policy reform done? It's been 9 years since California legalized medical cannabis, and we can't even get a banking bill out of Congress to legalize banking for cannabis. So I've just kind of given up on federal legislatures. But if to make this manageable, go talk to your city council, decriminalize it in your local city, and then maybe get a coalition together and talk about a statewide initiative. We're in this time where even with the current president, about to be President Trump, he's going to respect states' rights. So, I don't fear that Trump is going to come into Colorado and bust all the psilocybin healing centers. He didn't do that for cannabis. So this is a great way to start and maybe gives people some hope that they don't have to change federal law. Just change it one step at a time.
Yeah, so important. I mean, that's why I wanted to have you on the show is, when people start to get passionate, I think when I look back, it's like, did I choose to get arrested for opioids? Did I choose to lose my dad at 3? Did I choose? No, it's like I didn't. But at the same time, it's my path now, right? It's just kind of like, okay, this is the natural path of serving others, is having a voice for addiction recovery, whatever that means, mental health recovery. It's so diverse, the pathways into that. Yeah. And, so I think about my journey and sharing that with my audience, but I also think about bringing people like you on to understand how much work and how many years it takes to get this to happen. And I am curious though, have you ever, on the flip side of things, there's many people who are in treatment centers for psychedelics, for ketamine, for... Yes. So have you ever represented someone that was maybe serving a psychedelic or ketamine or something, and they got addicted and then ended up in treatment? I'm just kind of thinking the flip side of this thing.
Yeah, that's a great point. Like, part of our job is to be honest and full disclosure, and we're not propagandists. So psychedelics aren't for everyone. They're not harmless. Each of them is different and has a different risk profile. I have definitely had close friends who talk about MDMA addiction. I mean, MDMA is a amphetamine that you can absolutely become physically, psychologically addicted to MDMA. I think you could become, addicted to all these things psychologically. I think that is a risk in our current movement. I've been on a 7-year medicine journey, and the only reason I'm drinking medicine right now is really to serve others and be in ceremony with them. I'm kind of out of the trauma phase of my life. But I do see people that their whole life is built around psychedelics now, another ceremony in a month, another in a month. And I think there's an argument we see psychological addiction in our community right now and spiritual bypassing, that people aren't really working on things. They're just seeking out that next high or experience. And so I think it has to be talked about. And I think we have to hold each other accountable. And the answer to when should you drink more ayahuasca or when should you have more bufo is when you've integrated fully the insights you got from your last ceremony and you're actually living that reality. So if you're just going back to medicine over and over again and you're not changing your life, you're not doing the integration work you talked about, then this is just another form of addiction and spiritual bypassing. And so I have seen that and heard of that from friends. At the same time, psilocybin in particular, we have to also be clear, this is like the least risky drug when you look at the profile of addiction and mortality, there's uh, very little, there's no physical addiction qualities to psilocybin mushrooms. Again, there could be some psychological addiction issues, but there's also no overdose. You could just not possibly eat enough mushrooms. You would throw it up and you would never overdose on it. Same thing with LSD. Most of these psychedelics have a very low addiction profile. You mentioned ketamine. I do work with ketamine doctors and therapists. I mean, this is definitely something that has addictive quality, can be addictive if it's abused. And I've seen cases of even medical health professionals that becoming addicted. And they've lost their licenses for it. They're stealing ketamine from their own clinic. Or the doctor shopping that happens with ketamine. And now ketamine is more available than ever before. And, at festivals and Burning Man, you see people, inhaling ketamine, nasal inhaling ketamine. It's like, wow, this is definitely it's a party drug. There's no doubt about it. And I think we need to be clear about that. That's why I love organizations like Dance Safe and Zendo Project that are educating people about harm reduction and peer support for psychedelics and drug testing. Not to mention the risk of fentanyl contamination and MDMA or other powders and pills. So, I think all these things are critical discussions, and we shouldn't pretend there's no risk of it. But, like I said, in comparison to the other things, I think the risk is pretty low.
Yeah. And I mean, when I think about what really gets me into the clown world thinking is alcohol and just tobacco and alcohol and the stuff in the foods. And that's what really gets me is when we start to break it down is like, I can buy alcohol right now. I could buy as much as I want. And, but if I wanted to get some psilocybin, I mean, in Costa Rica, I could very easily, but I mean, back home, in New Hampshire, it's like, the healing properties and qualities of something from the earth and just having this incredible, even as a microdosing experience, to be able to get some mental clarity and relief from anxiety, even ADHD, and what psilocybin can do. It's wild to me that, I can access all these things and especially alcohol, but I can't get access to something from Mother Earth that potentially can be relief. And I know people personally who are on tons of SSRIs for over a decade who microdosed psilocybin and came off of all of their SSRIs. I know multiple people. There's so many people when you start to speak out loud that you start to meet. And I know people in, 20, 30 years in AA that have what they describe it as breaking out of the matrix with one LSD experience that made them look and go, whoa, I need to reassess my shadow and my trauma. I've never looked at that. And, we talk about people being suicidal in AA and taking their lives. I know many people have taken their life in AA, and it's not just in AA, it's outside of AA. But the point is that, people are really struggling internally. And I think that, having access and the work you're doing to help people to have access to these medicines. And of course, there's always the disclaimer, MDMA, ketamine, different things, even 5-MeO DMT. I got really passionate about that. I took the 5 training with Joelle and Victoria and Tiandava. And why did I take that? And this goes back to that. Why did I do that training for a year? It's because I had my own experience that was so mind-blowing. I'm still integrating, by the way, my first or second 5-MeO experience. I'm still integrating it years later. And that's healthy. That's healthy that I'm still respecting and integrating that. But my personal journey, my personal impact on myself, for me, it's like it seeps out to be an advocate, to learn more, to not just tell people to go smoke some do some 5-MeO. It's like, let's do this in a way that's informed and hopefully trauma informed when it's a medicine like that. But yeah, this is such a big discussion.
Say this
Please.
Between culture and law is so important because what we're hitting right now in terms of barriers in this movement and what you're talking about is that some people are saying, well, we can't allow psilocybin or bufo or anything else until we have an FDA study. FDA study that will give us the confidence that this is real and it really works. And this is our Western bias towards science and, double blind validation and the scientific method. And that's great. I support all that. I'm an all of the above guy. And let's have pharmaceutical psychedelics and let's have decriminalized and let's have state regulated. But it's just kind of ridiculous, isn't it, that you wouldn't go to a Mazatec person with 1,000 years of tradition using psilocybin and say, is psilocybin safe? Can we do that? Does this have benefits? Like you're talking about anecdotal, like your experience. Of course, there's positive benefit and safety profile of these substances when used correctly. And it's kind of absurd, and that's why what we're seeing in terms of roadblocks is states will say, yeah, we've heard this might have some benefit. Remember, FDA did give psilocybin breakthrough therapy status for treatment-resistant depression. FDA did give MDMA breakthrough therapy status for PTSD. So there is a lot of evidence already. It's just not finalized. But politicians in local states and cities are saying, why don't we just do a study bill? And so you see this in Texas and Utah, where there's now research allowed with psilocybin in a Utah hospital. One hospital could do one study. Texas is going to allow some studies on veterans. And of course, I support that, but don't let the research rabbit hole become the roadblock to access, because that's what the conservative, or I don't even, it's not about politics. That's what the resistant forces want to do. Democrats too. They want to say, let's just research this some more. And your point is, I think we have fundamental human rights to autonomy over our body. I think that especially natural substances that are put on the earth should never be criminalized. People's conduct with relation to others can be criminalized. You take drugs, you neglect your children, you drive high. That's the right dialogue. But I think we have this fundamental human right to take substances that are naturally occurring. The idea that the divine creator is a felon just seems ridiculous to me. So anyways, I think this is what we're facing in the law area is don't let your politicians say, well, just do a study. A study is a delay to nowhere. Like, we want access now. We want psilocybin now. We don't need an FDA study. And you put the safety parameters in there and hold people accountable. But, I think if we wait for FDA studies, we're going to wait another decade on a lot of substances, and a lot of people are going to needlessly suffer.
Yeah, it's really tragic, an epidemic in epic proportions. Because when I think about what you just said, I think about veterans and suicide rates. I think about people in addiction recovery and mental health. I mean, you're talking people are dying hundreds and hundreds and hundreds a day. And this hasn't stopped. I mean, when fentanyl crushed coming into America, I remember it when it happened, because it was like 2015? I remember living in New Hampshire. We had become the #1 overdose death rate in the country in New Hampshire. Yeah. And it was like, wow. And I'd watch people come into sober homes, and you'd see them one day, the next day they would be dead. And so, wow, that kind of sparked my own internal personal journey to leave my career and technology and get into what I do today, entrepreneurs in recovery. But does it need to take that? And I think today, the work that you're doing, the advising, the everything that you're doing is just, thank you so much. Because I can talk all day with all these people who are saying, we have good intentions and we want this to happen, but it's all underground. It's not, you're going to get slapped. And so, just thank you for just continuing the fight, my friend. Jeez.
And I appreciate the adoration and love here. I'll take all I could get. And just thinking about some other legal topics I want your listeners to keep in mind. I'm sure you were going to cover this, but I love this saying, when you have an opponent, you don't attack the opponent's weakness. You attack your opponent's strength. So what is the strength of America? Religious freedom. So in terms of advancing this agenda, and actually cohesive with our vision here. In the United States, if you're using psychedelics in a spiritual or religious manner, there's an argument that you're immune from criminal law. And so I love this, taking the strength of the United States and using it to our benefit, because we really are a country that deeply values spiritual freedom. And I know a lot of entrepreneurs and, regular folks in the U.S. kind of look at this like it's woo-woo and they're not spiritual. They're atheists. But the thing about psychedelics is, even if you're atheist, even if you have no belief system, you don't believe in a divine thing, when you get into that moment, to me, at least my hope is it piques your interest and curiosity. And wow, there really is like an all-pervading energy and life force. Every atom around us has a molecule spinning in circles, and we're spinning around a hydrogen bomb sun that's spinning around a black hole. And there's some mystery here. There's some mystery here. And, some people say to me, so my point is, life optimization people, I think some of them will find some spiritual grounding in these experiences. And some people say, well, I haven't had a lot of trauma in my life. I don't know why I need psychedelics. Well, listen, every single one of us is going to die. I hate to say it. So I don't know about you, but I had some issues around dying, and I'm not sure they're totally done. But psychedelics gave me so much, consolation around this topic. And whether you're spiritual or not, that is a spiritual issue. What happens when you die? What is the nature of your being? And so my whole point here is that if you were engaged in that psychedelic use for a spiritual purpose and you had some articulable explanation for that, you could be immune from criminal law. And there are 3 psychedelic churches federally recognized in the United States: the Santo Daime and the UDV, which are ayahuasca churches from Brazil. I'm a huge fan of the Santo Daime tradition. Another discussion on Maestro Irineu and the history of that. Anyways, that's recognized. And then a U.S.-inspired church that I got the honor to represent in the last few years, the Church of the Eagle and Condor, which is Americans who trained with Shipibo people in the Amazon. And last March 2024, with myself and 3 or 4 other lawyers, the federal government for the first time recognized a non-Christian-based, indigenous-based ayahuasca church in the United States and gave federal recognition. So it's right now only 3 ayahuasca churches. I have another lawsuit. I'm in federal court in California. I think I'll have the 4th case ever. But the logic for ayahuasca applies to psilocybin, to 5-MeO-DMT, to iboga, to all these things. And this is a huge area of growth. It's also a huge area of ambiguity, and a lot of people saying I'm a church and I'm legal, and you got to buyer beware and do your proper vetting. But it's an avenue that if you're in Arkansas and you're worried about criminal sanctions, then maybe you should put down on paper what these spiritual, values are. And most of us have the same 5 or 6. Plant medicine connects us to the divine, connects us to the divine within, to the divine in each other, to Mother Earth, heals trauma, shows us wisdom on what happens after death, connects us to astral beings, that alien beings and astral beings that send messages to us. I mean, again, some of this might be too woo-woo for some people, but I think it's actually true. There's definitely a universe of entities out there that psychedelics can help you connect with, and spirits. I've seen the world of the dead, intergenerate your ancestors. So, I mean, for a lot of people, this might be a path that even if they're in an illegal state, that they could do work legally. And happy to talk to anybody for a few minutes for free on that topic. It's one of my favorite.
Yeah, I want to get into that. And I just want to share something personal that happened today to me. I went out surfing, and I tried a surfboard that was too small for me, and I got over my head, and literally, so the surfboard is a flotation device, it's a lifesaver, right? And I went over my head, and I got hit by a really big wave, and it snapped my leash, and my flotation device left me. And then I went to go touch the bottom, and I was way overhead, and I was way out. Yeah. And I had this moment, and I've had some near-death experiences
Wow.
particularly on 5-MeO DMT. And I can tell you what happened today in the ocean when that happened, when I felt death was near, is I did rely on my psychedelic experiences of death before death. And I started to relax. Now, of course, I panicked at first because I realized like my flotation device is gone. But then I realized, oh, these waves that are coming, let me breathe into them. Let me go backwards and swim backwards. And I got out ultimately, but I relied on my psychedelic experiences, not just my resilience of the life journey I've had. I relied on those experiences to be like, it wasn't that I was like, oh, if I die, who cares? It was like, whoa, you know what? I'm going to breathe this experience in. And of course I came out. So I had a direct experience today with meeting these, master teacher plants, or these different experiences I've had to show me life is precious. And I came out and I sat for 30 minutes to calm my nervous system.
Wow.
But then I had a lot of gratitude that I'm carrying right into this conversation.
Okay.
So yeah. And I wanted to just share that because the religious use of psychedelics and the work that you're doing advising clients and how to obtain religious exemption, I mean, how important is that? And I really would like to know what would be that process if anyone is curious. How does that process work, and how long does it take typically if someone wants to start their own church? And
yeah, the weird thing about this topic is you could go to the DEA tomorrow and say, hi, we're a mushroom church. Will you please recognize us? They've started a process in 2009 to receive petitions like this. They've received 15 or 20 of them. They've never approved any of them voluntarily. They've only approved churches after they've been sued. So most people feel that going to them and asking permission is kind of a waste of time. They have no statutory deadline to respond. So mostly they just ignore you for years and years, like literally years and years. The General Accounting Office, the GAO, issued a report on this topic and said this process is broken. I mean, it's a waste of time. No one's doing it. So, it's not just advocates saying this, it's the government. They know it doesn't work. So how do you sue them? You can't sue them unless you're actually interfered with. So that sounds terrible. That means that like somebody has to come in the door and say, give me your ayahuasca or give me your mushrooms. But that has actually happened. So these cases I was talking about, especially with ayahuasca right now, there's a lot of seizures at the border. So if they take your ayahuasca or your sacrament somehow, you can go to court and say, they took my sacrament. That's a harm. That's standing. We have standing to sue. If you don't have a harm, if we were just sitting in circle and praying to mushrooms right now, and we went sued them, the courts would throw us out of court. So you literally have to have some interference. And, some people are thinking about setting up the interference, like calling the government saying, hey, we're having ceremony tomorrow with mushrooms. It's a little drastic. And the lawsuit thing is not very inviting. It takes 3 or 4 years to finish a lawsuit. It was 3 years for the Church of the Eagle and Condor. We're about 2 years into this new one in California I've got going. And for that reason, most people, instead of asking permission, they're building the argument of why what they're doing is exempt. There's no requirement to get formal exemption. If the government came in on your ceremony and you had doctrine and you had membership agreements and you had diversion prevention plans and emergency response plans, all the things that they're expecting to see of a valid religious organization and more, not just those things. This is what I do for people. I help them build out their doctrine, their response plans, their diversion prevention plans, their membership agreements, their liability waiver forms. I talk to them about nonprofit financial management. So, if you're going to run a church, it's a nonprofit. You're not just taking Venmo into your personal bank account. So you have to work through all those things. And the stronger the argument you have, the more potential there is if they do interfere, you might get formally recognized, or at least they might walk away. The less strong, the more it looks like, you give me $100, I give you an ounce of mushrooms. You give me $200, you get 2 ounces. Even if you said that was religious, it's going to look like you're selling mushrooms. The more it looks like that, the more risk you have, and you could find yourself prosecuted. You know, if you have some legitimate religious defense, I'll give you an example. You're probably looking at a dismissal of a case or some kind of sweetheart deal. If you had a legitimate defense. In Denver, I represented the Jewish psilocybin church a couple of years ago. One of the members, actually, not the whole church, but this is all public information. It's in the Denver Post, so I'm not sharing confidential information. And yeah, they walked in on a warehouse with a bunch of mushrooms, and police don't know what's going on. They just arrest people, right? Later, we said, and by the way, the penalties in that case were 8 years mandatory prison. So there are still some very serious, because if you get over a certain quantity of any drug, there's mandatory minimums. 8 years mandatory prison, and we showed the DA, this is spiritual use. They have doctrine. The money is donation only. It's not mandatory. There's sliding scales. And at the end of the day, this was before we legalized psilocybin in Colorado. The DA in Denver said, okay, we'll dismiss the case. This is not our priority. We're worried about fentanyl and methamphetamine, and actually showed the DA a study that said people that use psilocybin are actually less likely to commit crime. So I'm like, what are we doing here? You're prosecuting somebody for sitting in a circle and praying, and they're less likely to commit crime for it. And she agreed. And so that's an example of a religious defense has real meaning, even if you don't have formal recognition. You could have a case dismissed. At the same time, I know of cases around the country where people are sloppy and they don't do any of this upfront work, and police come in and they end up getting kind of bullied into, okay, stay out of trouble, stop doing that for a year or two, and we'll dismiss the case. So it just depends on how much work people want to do. But if you have that spiritual value, I encourage you to look up some resources out there. There's a free guide through the Chacruna Institute called A Guide for Psychedelic Churches, written by my friend Allison Hoots, and I helped edit the document. So there's some free things out there. If you do some research on this, you really do need to educate yourself about the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, which is the foundation of the defense. Everybody talks about, oh, the Second Amendment or First Amendment protects me, freedom of religion. No, courts have said the First Amendment does not protect you in this case from using psychedelics, but it's the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, a statute of Congress that actually does protect you. And that's the basis of how these other churches have been recognized. So we could talk for hours about that. But...
Yeah, I'm so glad I brought that up. Like, I've been wanting to ask that question to someone who knows what they're talking about. And you just, wow, thank you so much for that little piece right there, because I think there's a lot of people who are wanting to learn more. And I know people who are going to start churches, and man, that was incredible. And I'm going to try to link. Yeah, we'll link that in the episode show notes for that document as well. So this has been a fantastic conversation. I wanted to ask you personally, what are you manifesting right now? Meaning, like, what is your highest vision? What are you most excited about bringing to reality right now?
Yeah, you caught me 6 days before I go to Brazil for 2.5 weeks to do some work with a very dear friend who's the leader of the Santo Daime Church, an ayahuasca church in Brazil. And then after some work with him, we're going to go to the deep Amazon, to the territory of the Yawanawa people, one of the Amazonian ayahuasca tribes. They are hosting the Indigenous Ayahuasca Conference. I feel very honored to be invited. It's invite only and very exclusive. There will be the Yawanawa, the Ashanika people, the Yanomami people, perhaps the Kutanawa people. Hopefully the Huni Queen will be there. These are some of the most famous indigenous ayahuasca tribes from the Amazon. And in terms of this topic we were just talking about, like, we've had hybridized, westernized churches recognized in the U.S., and we had this first one that has some indigenous background. but we've never had actual indigenous people recognized in the United States. And, I don't want to share any confidential information, but my hope is that I can help indigenous people who come to the United States not have to worry about getting arrested at the border with ayahuasca and not have to worry about doing a ceremony. I mean, I've heard stories where their sacred feathers are confiscated at the border and their ayahuasca and they're deported and they're barred from reentry. This is like a very humiliating thing for a very proud indigenous shaman to be treated this way in the United States. If you're, again, one of these tribes, thousands of years of lineage. So that is very on the front of my mind since I'm about to be in Brazil. And I encourage people to learn more about the Amazonian psychedelic traditions. It's such a gift to still have access to these traditions. And imagine these people who suffered colonization are still open to sharing their wisdom with others. It's proof that, this claim that Columbus discovered the Americas. Of course, he didn't 500 years ago. But my point is discovery is ongoing, and learning about South America is part of our maturation as North Americans. And it's a beautiful tradition. And this is part of this union of North and South America, the union of masculine and feminine, of Western and indigenous. These are, some of the fundamental guideposts that I hold. So there's that, indigenous. But then also you're catching me right at the beginning of licensing in Colorado for psilocybin therapy. And I've been working for, really 25 years, but hardcore the last 4 years to make this happen. And of course, I'm taking off for Brazil right at the beginning, but I'll be back in a couple of weeks. And we are starting to, apply for healing centers in Colorado to give people psilocybin. And the rules are complicated. It's going to be kind of a mess rolling out. And that's why you need help from lawyers like me. But just imagine, in 6 months, you'll be able to come to Colorado legally and have a psilocybin therapy session. And also, for your background and your history and your community, if you have an opiate or alcohol addiction problem, we also are on track to regulate and have access for iboga and ibogaine in Colorado. And my hope that Colorado becomes the world leader in opiate and alcohol addiction recovery with the use of ibogaine in Colorado. That's not going to happen right away, but we're on track to make that happen in the next couple of years. So yeah, that's why I'm glad I've still got a few years of work life left here, because it's going to be a really exciting decade ahead of us. And we're fixing the car while we drive it. I just hope it doesn't break down in the meantime, but Colorado's doing its part, and please come visit us and make it so that, like cannabis, Colorado is going to become old news if the 40 states legalize psychedelics like they did cannabis. And I think we will get there. And hopefully in the next 10 or 15 years, we'll be there.
Well, I definitely want to connect with you after your journeys, and I want to connect with you after this rolls out. So let's get you back on the show in a couple months after all this blows over. And yeah, just thank you so much for coming on the show. Thank you for the work you're doing, the warrior that you are. And that word keeps coming up because what you're doing is, oh man, you are going in the firing lines. And we need that because we have a lot of people's lives on the line, and we can learn from a lot of these indigenous lineages and the way that they have done things. So thank you for that. I want to let the audience know, how can they work with you? How could they reach out to you and hire you? And
yeah, definitely take a look at McAllisterLawOffice.com, McAllister, right there on the screen, McAllisterLawOffice.com. I also am on the advisory board of the Psychedelic Parenthood Community, which is advocating for parents and helping educate ourselves on what that looks like to be a parent who has psychedelic practice. I'm on the advisory board of the Sacred Plant Alliance, a coalition of sacred plant churches where you could go and get best practices and learn about how to do some of these basic documents and forums I was talking about. So look up the Sacred Plant Alliance, Psychedelic Parenthood Community, the Chacruna Institute. I'm no longer formally on the board of Chacruna, but I am on the Council for Protection of Sacred Plants. Chacruna.net, Chacruna, Chacruna.net. This is a great resource for BIPOC, LGBTQ, social justice issues around psychedelics. And there's just so many great organizations. I'm outside general counsel for the MAP Psychedelic Science event. So come see us in Denver, the largest psychedelic science event in the world, 12 to 15,000 people, June 16th to 20th, I think, this summer, 2025. And that's another great organization to check out. The Zendo Project I mentioned, zendoproject.org, dancesafe.org. It goes on, and there's so many things. Like I said at the beginning, whatever you care about harm reduction, there's an organization. You care about sitting with people, that's the Zendo Project. You care about parenthood, psychedelic parenthood. You care about churches, you care about BIPOC folks. There's an organization with a focus in psychedelics in each of those topics. And just network, get to know your community. And if you feel called, please bring your energy. We need you. So, and reach out anytime.
Yeah, thank you so much, Sean. Thank you for dropping these wisdom bombs and all these resources. We're going to link them to the show. Hey, it was so great to connect with you. And I'm going to come to Colorado and let's grab a coffee if you drink it. And I'll bring some from Costa Rica, my friend.
For sure. Maybe I'll come to Costa Rica. I'll be there next summer. So maybe I'll see you.
Anytime, okay, my friend.
Thank you so much, Jesse.
Yeah, thank you too.
Thank you for checking out Entrepreneurs of Recovery podcast. We are so appreciative that you are here. Make sure you go ahead and like and subscribe to the show on YouTube. Leave a review on iTunes and Spotify so more people can find the show. Once again, thank you so much. We have great episodes and content come out in the future. Thank you for being here. Have a blessed day.